Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for this panel discussion on integrating technology and nature into urban design, part of our second annual Sustainability Week. My name is Amanda Stuckey, and I'm a principal with the Policy and Insights practice at Economist Impact, the research and engagement platform of the Economist Group. And I have the distinct pleasure of moderating this discussion today. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. In a world facing the prospect of significant warming, the design and development of new cities, as well as adaptations made to existing ones, demands fresh thinking about resilience and sustainability. This panel will discuss how sustainable cities, driven by smart design and infrastructure, can be developed and financed, while considering key questions such as how smarter energy systems, waste management, and heating can be built into cities alongside nature and increased biodiversity. Joining us for this discussion today is an esteemed panel, including Catherine Barber, Assistant Director of Environment and Energy for London, Christina Gamboa, Chief Executive of the World Green Building Council, Kathy Baughman-McLeod, Senior Vice President and Director of the Adrienne Arsht Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center, and Brad Haberle, Senior Vice President of the Global Services Business at Siemens. So I'd like to start off our discussion with a broad question. Both technology and nature have important roles to play as we think about urban resilience and sustainability. How can nature specifically be considered in the development and adaptation of cities to increase carbon capture and manage vulnerabilities to an increasingly extreme and unpredictable climate? And I think to start us off, I was hoping to direct this first to you, Catherine. You want to jump in?
Thank you, Amanda. Well, we saw this summer with the extreme heat waves in Europe and last year with the flash flooding, just how important nature is in adapting our cities to climate change. And that can be through trees providing shade if there's extreme heat, or absorbing water if there's surface flooding. And it's also really important for our well-being. We saw in the pandemic just how much it meant to people if they had access to green space and the inequalities that arose if they didn't. So that's one of the reasons why Sadiq Khan, our Mayor of London, is really focused on increasing and improving the green cover in our city. And we've planted over 400,000 trees and improved over 500 hectares of green space in his term in office. And finally, I'd just say that a greener city is good for people's health. So some of the projects that we fund in London, like walking routes or green cycling routes, also help to keep people fit. It means that we're breathing clean air and we're generally feeling better about ourselves.
Great, thank you, Catherine. Christina, would you like to respond as well?
Thank you. Yes, I would like to build on that because I have the privilege of lead a global network that works in over 70 countries, the Green Building Councils. And what we've learned throughout the years, this year we turned 20, and the network has been advancing best practice in sustainability and climate action for some while. And we know that local solutions around nature are an integral part of the system's thinking that can deliver quality infrastructure that is fit for purpose and for livelihoods. There's a bunch of, let's say, best practice out there, but I would say that this is a partnership that has to go hand in hand, where private sector is realizing, for example, these nature-based solutions, how they can drive more value, avoid just thinking about short-term cost, thinking holistic thinking, and of course, partnering up, for example, like leaders like Catherine in London, where they're also enabling with regulation to achieve those goals. It's very inspiring that nature-based solutions are now high up in the agenda. They should. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about how can we enable that accountability of the private sector wanting to do more, the enabling levers for change for them to make that mainstream, and of course, us continuing to champion consumers to demand more of these and change their mindsets, because the solutions we have today are not fit for purpose and we can do better.
Absolutely. Thank you. Kathy, I'd also be interested in your perspective on this question too.
You bet. Morning, afternoon, evening. Nice to see everybody. I want to bring it's a little bit of a downer, but one of the things that is most challenging about the nature-based solutions as the planet warms is that the trees and species that we're investing in and protecting for cooling the planet. And I agree immensely with Christina and Catherine that the heat is threatening those species. And there was an article 2 days ago saying that 100% of Australia's trees are threatened by extreme temperatures and by climate and drought and things that stem from the heat. And so we need to double down on the investment side in the nature-based solutions and use technology to help us do that. And there are lots of examples of apps that have citizens taking care of trees or being compensated for caring for trees. There are use of satellite imagery to watch to see where tree cover is being lost. So there are lots of solutions, but we need to accelerate the investment and the effort and the metrics and use the technology to help us do that, because one quick example is that there is a beetle that proliferates under the conditions of climate change in Athens, and 30% of the mulberry trees that shade Athens have been felled due to this beetle. And so they're trying to beat back the beetle, but it's difficult because the tree cover reduces, it gets hotter, and the beetle does better. And so there are some reasons why we need to accelerate and more than double down, I would say quintuple down on investing, because it's the most cost-effective solution we have. So we got to jump on it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kathy. And finally, Brad, it would be great to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda, and good day to everyone. We come working for Siemens, we come a little bit different perspective, but how we look at it is we need to rethink how we kind of plan, design, and build and manage cities today to be more resilient, because the conditions are constantly changing. We all know the impact of cities on the CO2 emissions, and that's a big effect of what we look like, how you improve that. And what we believe in is to do that is you have to kind of create much more smarter cities, digitize the infrastructure. It's not digitized today. It's all standalone. It will play a big part in kind of solving some of these nature's problems on there. And what we're seeing is really a couple things that need to be combined. Is first and foremost, huge impact. We need to have much more renewables, but renewables only work if you have intelligent energy supply, so you can make that decisions and those trade-offs. But you also, at the same time, if you look at the buildings are creating huge emission problems, so you still have to do energy efficiency and smart building. But the new dynamic that's going to impact nature and how cities are operated is the e-mobility movement on there. But combining all those things in such a way that has flexibility to make trade-offs, make better decisions, well, we could have a huge impact on what the impact of cities are, and then it will help the nature accordingly.
Absolutely. These are all really interesting and important points, and things we'll definitely dive into further during the discussion. So thank you. I'd like to dive a little deeper in picking up on some of the things that you just said, Brad. As the majority of populations move into urban areas, what are some other ways that cities can be future-proofed and adapted to ensure resilience against climate change? And I think, Catherine, if I can start with you, you spoke a little bit about the perspective from London, but I'd be interested in hearing a bit more specifically how cities can innovate sort of within themselves to do this and adapt.
Right. So, for example, in London, the mayor has powers where it comes to planning and to transport as well. So, for new developments that are built in London, we can require them to be net zero. We do. We're the first city in the UK to do that. We can guide how much greening needs to be included in the spaces that are being developed, and that helps to make the city greener. And that's really about getting into influencing the development process at the very beginning. So it's not an afterthought, it's really included in how we think about what is good for the future in London. In transport, one of the big innovations that we introduced was the ultra low emission zone in 2019. And in London, we used to have smogs. My grandparents would have remembered that, the kind of toxic air you could see. And now we don't have that kind of pollution, but we do have fine particulates and nitrogen oxides, and those cause around 4,000 Londoners to die prematurely each year. So we introduced ultra low emission zone in the centre of London, and it had a really dramatic effect. It cut the number of dirty cars being driven in that zone. It cut nitrogen dioxide levels by the roadside by 44%. It means our children, when they go to school now, where air quality is within legal limits and meeting World Health Organization expectations. So we're really proud of having done that in London. We're seeing other cities look to us to emulate that example. And now we're trying to expand that zone to all of Greater London.
Great. Those best practices are so important, and thank you for sharing more about that. I'd like to pass this over to you, Kathy. I think you have some really interesting examples of sort of creative initiatives to tackle climate's impact on things like health, economic output, and infrastructure, with cities really being sort of at the tip of the spear. So, for example, the sort of prevalence of new chief heat officers is increasing. So as we think about solutions like this, what will be their role and how are they taking action to adapt cities?
Thank you. Yes, the CHOs are in Washington with us right now, all from all around the world. So yes, the chief heat officers are sit at the top of the city government and are focused every day on protecting vulnerable communities and their livelihoods from heat. That means looking at, of course, nature-based solutions, but all of the solutions around protection awareness. And we've also worked with our partners to categorize heat waves the way that we do hurricanes and cyclones. And we are piloting naming heat waves. We named, with the city of Seville in Spain, their mayor there and the meteorological agency of Spain, her heat wave Zoe this summer. And so this summer saw immense heat impacts, and those have been referenced already, but the death toll is just stunning. And we are deploying as quickly as possible chief heat officers, naming and categorizing heat waves. Heat season, the Miami-Dade mayor, Daniela Levine Cava, declared heat season just like a fire season, just like a hurricane season, to raise awareness. And we are also quantifying the impacts of heat. And we last year looked at the cost of heat in terms of worker productivity to the US economy and found that impact to be $100 billion to the US writ large. And 18% of that loss is disproportionately borne by Black and Hispanic workers in the South, which is not surprising. These are people working outside. And so that has immense financial impact on the local economy and reverberations, of course, beyond that. That number rose to $500 million in 2050. And we recently took the same methodology with our partner Vivid at Vivid Economics and looked at 12 cities across the world, half in the north and half in the south, and found some similar findings, including the fact that 10% of economic output is lost every year and growing in Bangkok due to the economy on the motorbikes, and that includes the particulate matter and the heat and the slowdown that causes. We also found in Miami-Dade County, their annual budget is $9 billion, and the heat losses are $10 billion in 2020. So the entire county budget is evaporated by worker productivity loss. And so that hurts the worker and it hurts the local economy. And so we are bringing attention to the economic impacts, but that has, as I said, implications to supply chain and to the businesses doing work with those communities and that workforce. And so we also launched at the World Economic Forum the Heat Action Platform, which is all of the interventions that you can undertake to address heat, and a policy toolkit. And California just passed a law, the governor signed a law that covers 40 million Californians for categorized heat waves. And so we're making some progress in raising awareness and with some policy, but we also have the nature-based solutions and some technology. And I'll stop there. I can get pretty excited about this. The heat agenda, it feels good because you can do something about it and people don't have to die from heat. And so there's tons of evidence base and financial and insurance solutions. And so lots of good stuff around this one.
Really interesting, and those numbers are striking. And I also appreciate the optimism as well that we can do something about it. It makes it a really attractive problem to solve, doesn't it? Great. Well, that's really interesting. And I know sort of one specific tool that we haven't touched on much yet, but I know plays a part in this is digital technology. And Brad, your colleagues have said before that digitalization in buildings and grids is lagging behind that of other sectors. So I'm curious what needs to change to accelerate the digital transformation of infrastructure. And for example, what is the role of the Internet of Things and in developing an adaptive city?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And first, I just kind of want to jump off what Catherine said. A lot of credit gets to London, and you see other cities taking the right actions to kind of prepare the city and prepare the decisions of the industry to make good decisions, and very helpful. And I'll just give a couple examples of that and then jump off it with the digitalization. Is number one, by having those requirements up front when they build buildings to be more energy efficient and be green, really critical. Also, what we see is the requirements to report energy and reduce their energy is really helpful. We see cities, and the third piece is then the incentives with either the utilities or the cities to actually make those changes. Those three things help a lot. And then the only other piece, which I said, is actually then to make it all kind of work together. That's the part where digitalization works out there, because inside of that, the dynamics are really interesting. In buildings, for example, when you digitize buildings and see how they're operated, and you start to get transparency and make trade-off decisions just inside of buildings, you can reduce anywhere 20-30% emissions very easily, but that's not really done on a regular basis. And then now when you connect that into the grid and connect that also into renewables, then you're making good trade-off decisions on when do you use renewables, when do you not reuse renewables, what's the most efficient, what's happening in the environment, and you're making trade-off decisions. That today is not really connected on a digitalized way. The grid and buildings are not connected in an efficient way in a lot of places. So more information and legislation on how do we drive that connection and a reporting technology will help a lot move this along. And then the dynamic that's happening that's going to help, but also make it even more challenges is the e-mobility, because that's going to create a huge amount of positive, because we're going to take emissions out of there, but it's also going to cause a lot of stress on the grid and buildings because they're going to be using those loads on grid and buildings. So you have to manage that dynamic. Otherwise, it's not going to work and get out of balance. But it's easily done if we can have the right information and make those decisions, have those trade-offs. We do it every day in buildings, but now it needs to be done with a combination of the grid and the e-mobility and those three things. And that information will create you a lot of quick decisions that have lots of savings and a lot of efficiencies, which will produce less emissions. All those three critical to our future state.
Absolutely. Did others from the panel want to jump in on this as well?
Yes, if I may. Oh,
Sure. Please go ahead.
I went with
Christina?
the hand and the voice first. Thank you. Yes, I was very inspired when I was hearing, because it is what Brad also is speaking about is the systems integration, right? And I guess it's also to weave into nature is about the intersectoral policy interventions and the platforms. And I guess that goes into the collaboration that Catherine was saying. I just wanted to mention, for example, a project from World GBC that's called Build Upon. 8 pilot cities have been driving collaborative building renovation. So we're starting with, let's say, with a wave of energy efficiency information. But the interesting thing is that there's already a city in Italy that has been able to integrate census data from families to the geographical information systems data. And then we can now understand better, the city is understanding better where the energy poverty problems are, which are quite relevant in the moments we're living today, to address how are they affected by the inefficiency of the stock, driving better policies to address the needs of those populations, and of course, building in resiliency as the weather changes and the climate emergency continues on. So those sorts also of collaboratives from the business with the cities and finding the data that already exists from the social perspective is key for us to continue to make more of the systems thinking that also links social needs. And of course, that at the heart of it is valuing nature. We're nothing without nature. So it's that collaborative of initiatives that I think is really powerful. And there's a lot of things like that happening in city networks around the world that are inspiring, and we need to share them. Share them quickly to avoid mistakes.
Absolutely. That intersection is so important. Catherine.
Thanks. I just wanted to give some examples about how data is allowing people to make informed decisions about their environment and how they interact with it. So in London, we have a network of air quality monitors, which are based in local communities, requested by active citizens. And we call that program Breathe London. And that has really helped people to understand where there are particular risks to their air quality and when it's worse, when it's better. And it's got them lobbying politicians to do more to tackle the problem. And now through the C40 network of global cities tackling climate change, we're expanding that to Breathe Global program, and particularly helping cities in the global south to do the same kind of monitoring, which then leads to advocacy, which should lead to change. Or another example we have here is we call our Cool Spaces platform, where businesses, community groups, etc., can volunteer to make spaces available to the public. So if there's a heat wave, they can keep safe. And we have a Cool Spaces app, and this year nearly 500 organizations signed up to provide spaces where people could go to keep safe. So that's just some ways of sharing information. And then to come back to what Brad said earlier about using smart technology, one of the things we're looking at next on transport is moving towards smart road user charging. So at the moment, we base our ultra low emission zone on the standards that the cars meet. But in future, we could look at things like what is the local area, what is the provision of public transport, are there alternatives that people could be using, how many kilometers have they driven, also information about the vehicles, but it would encapsulate a lot more data, and it would mean that we could really target the charging to bring down transport where that dirty car use where it doesn't need to be, and allow it where it still is needed. So that would be becoming much more sophisticated using new technologies, and that's something that we hope to introduce by the end of this decade in London.
Really, really interesting. I'd like to pick up on something, on the example you were talking about with sort of the global south too, because I think it's important for us to consider and recognize that when these issues are discussed, we often focus on, or there's more focus on initiatives in cities and advanced economies. But I think we also see this landscape of vast opportunities for innovation in emerging economies as well. So I wondered, Christina, if maybe you could chime in on how we can ensure that emerging economies can sort of leapfrog the last 20 years of sustainable building growth in developed economies and think about building resilience. And also, what are some of the tools that are important to consider for doing this?
Totally. And it's so relevant. I'm from Colombia, and I know that developing cities around the world are going to be growing at a very fast rate. And that will need a lot of collaboration and a lot of information for better choices to be made. Because if cities just expand without systems thinking, valuing nature, we will be doing away with more biodiversity hotspots along the way. And that will bring not resilience, it will bring us, again, a lot of vulnerability because we depend on healthy ecosystems and cities need a healthy ecosystemic services to survive. So I guess the challenge, for example, as we go, or the opportunity, as we go to the UN Climate Conference in Egypt and then to Emirates, is to understand that we need to flag a different way of thinking in terms of how that infrastructure that is yet to be built can be green, can be prosperous, and can be fit for purpose, can be resilient from the onset. And we know that nature-based solutions are more cost effective, that they are just, if we look through them, it's just makes common sense, goes to our livability, it preserves nature, and it helps us also address the climate crisis. So I think developing countries are realizing the agenda of mitigation is important to also as they adapt. So low carbon is great, and that nature positive thinking is critical because GDPs from cities, which are very important around the world, are going to be even more vulnerable if cities are not livable, attractive, and of course, deliver the systems while protecting nature. So it's a huge topic, but I'm very confident that experts like the ones that we have in this webinar and everyone that is hearing us can act in providing the right connectivity and solutions for accountability, disclosure, better policies, and better climate action that is attentive, that it's not doing away with the benefits of having healthy ecosystems.
Great. Thanks a lot, Christina. And likely our last question for this session, and related to what you were just talking about, we've sort of talked already about the political will aspect and collaboration. But Kathy, maybe you could chime in here because I'm curious about how adaptation to climate change can be financed and what examples there are of where this is kind of happening successfully and innovation is happening.
I think one of the most important things from a investor perspective is that the cash flows and returns from adaptation, we need to manage our expectations about what they are. We often talk about adaptation in terms of risk reduction, and that risk reduction means avoided loss and avoided costs. But there are lots of situations in adaptation where you don't have a cash flow. It's hard to make lots of money saving money. And so that's an old phrase, but holds true that there are some challenges to the investment committees of a lot of investors and companies. I'm thinking right now about the investment side of insurance companies who want to invest in adaptation and resilience, but find the returns too low for their expectations. And so I think we need to really talk about what kinds of cash flows versus benefits that you see in nature-based solutions is one of those places where you have immense benefit. You can monetize those benefits. Some of those benefits are public, some of those benefits are private. And there are all sorts of examples about investments in forests and in blue carbon and mangroves and temperate wetlands. But in cities, thinking about water infrastructure and the role of water infrastructure to keep a city cool and keep the water sufficient. And those ratepayer situations are a much better opportunity for investment. I'd also point to the role of risk transfer and parametric insurance combined with capital to reduce some of the risks that can help investors feel more comfortable in some of these, what will feel like new types of projects. And then another challenge is aggregating to the size that we need. Climate adaptation is local, where climate mitigation is global. And so I'm oversimplifying, of course, for our short time we have left, but want to say there's immense opportunity and a lot of advancement in the adaptation financing space, but we'll need to put some scrutiny on the expectation of returns and then really focus on the benefits. And there are so many, and nature-based solutions are one of the best examples of multiple benefits that can be monetized.
Great, thank you. Certainly an important space to keep watch of. All right, well, all too soon. We're unfortunately out of time, but today's discussion has been fascinating. So thank you so much to our panelists, Catherine, Christina, Kathy, and Brad, and to all of you for joining us. Please stay tuned for the next session, which will begin shortly. Thank you and take care.
Bye.